How's it going? My name is Dennis Logan, and I'm a performance specialist here at Exos. Today we're going to talk about regeneration, and one of the key components to regeneration, which is soft tissue. A lot of the times when we think of performance, we think about how we're going to stimulate the body, and we also think about certain things that we're going to do to help the body recover from that stimulation that we do. One of the key things that we want to also focus on is preparing the body and preparing it in a certain way where we're actually affecting the tissue. We can do that in the beginning part of any type of exercises that we do in pillar prep, but more importantly, we can do it after we exercise in a regeneration session to make sure that the tissue returns to a certain quality that we need for it to recover in a way that is going to allow us to apply more resistance, more stimulus, and a greater adaptation in the next session that follows. So we're going to really focus on the key things that we can do to make sure that the tissue returns to the type of quality that we need it to be at so that we can continue to get the performance gains that we're looking for. This movement is trigger point for the arch. What we're going to focus on here is trigger pointing the bottom part of that foot to be able to relax those muscles that are going to affect how we actually use our ankle. So what we're going to have JP do here is focus on using this ball as his trigger point mechanism. Now you can use a baseball, a lacrosse ball, a golf ball, anything that's dense that you're going to be able to put underneath your foot. So you don't necessarily have to use a baseball. The key is going to be putting the ball in that position where we're on the inside of that arch and starting to apply pressure. What we want to do first off is make sure that we get the person accustomed to this. This can be very painful to start with, so JP will just slowly roll that ball underneath the arch of his foot, making sure that he goes from the heel all the way to the front side of the foot where his toes are. After he gets accustomed to this movement and he starts to find out exactly what kind of pressure he needs to affect that trigger point, then he can actually start to manipulate his foot by either flexing his toes or extending his toes to open up the bottom part of that foot as he takes his foot the entire range of motion that he's going to need while he's trigger pointing the bottom part of his foot. This will help aid in the recovery and the relaxation of the bottom parts of his muscles in his foot that will help him be able to use and set his arch in a better way so that he can use both his foot and ankle complex to improve his performance. This is trigger point for the TFL. Now the TFL is a commonly overused muscle. It's a small muscle, but it aids in a lot of movements at the hip, so it is usually overworked and is a prime spot for us to use this trigger point. Finding TFL can be a bit of a trick though. So what I want to do is I want to show you an easy way to find it. JP is going to put his palm flat on the side of his hip and he can use his pocket as a landmark. And when he has his hand there, what he's going to do is he's going to rotate his leg inside and outside. And what he'll do is he'll feel that muscle activate right on the side of his hip. That's around the region, if not right on the TFL, and that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to take that ball and he's going to put it on the side of his hip. We're going to switch sides so that you can see it on this side. And to start, he's just going to focus on applying pressure. And the first time that we do this, it's usually really intense. So all we want to do is get used to the type of pressure that we're applying. So JP here is going to use his forearms, his elbows, to be able to find out how much pressure he wants to apply into that TFL. As an advancement from that, we can either move our bodies up and down to run along the length of the TFL, or we can actually start performing movements at the hip. We can either flex or extend the knee, or internally or externally rotate the hip to be able to apply that pressure change through movement to trigger point that TFL. This movement is trigger point for the piriformis. Now, much like the other muscles that we talked about, the piriformis tends to be an overworked muscle. As part of the lateral rotators of the hip, it tends to be on and activated a lot more than the other muscles that we would expect. So again, we want to be able to trigger point to release that particular muscle. Finding the piriformis can be somewhat difficult, but we'll have JP put his finger on the greater trochanter of his hip. He'll start to slide his fingers down and around towards his glutes because the piriformis lies in parallel to the glute med, and he'll find a tender muscle there, and that's usually the piriformis. He'll put the ball right on that spot, get himself set up at an angle where he can apply pressure to it, and then now what he'll do is he'll internally and externally rotate that hip, taking that piriformis through its range of motion with that pressure on it to be able to release it and trigger point it the way we want to. This movement is going to be trigger point for the pec. When we think about the shoulders and we think about shoulder pain, we have to incorporate what is going on at the pec as being a possible cause for the shoulder pain that you may experience. Much like the other muscles, we're going to use the ball to first explore and find out where that pain is or where that trigger point is, and then work from there. So as we can see, JP is taking the ball, he's placing it on the pec to be able to find out where that pain is, and then he's going to apply that pressure by using a block. Once he finds that spot, he's going to externally rotate that shoulder and get it parallel to the floor, slide that hand up overhead and slide it down to take that pec through its range of motion while we apply pressure to trigger point it in the way that we want to. This movement is going to be trigger point for the VMO. Now, a lot of the movements for the smaller muscles, we're going to utilize the ball because we're able to target that particular spot. So when we think about trigger pointing the quads and we think about trigger pointing the extensors of the knee, we're going to use a barrel roller. But when we think about getting to that small point, the VMO, which also has a focus and has a role in extending that knee, but it's a bit harder to find, we're going to use the ball. The VMO typically is going to be that big fleshy part towards the inside or the medial part of that knee right here. So JP is going to take that ball, he's going to roll over, and he's going to place that ball right on, again, that tender spot. In that area, he's going to be able to explore to find out where it is, and then when he finds it, he's going to apply pressure by squaring his hips towards the ground. Again, this can be very, very intense to start. Once he's past that point, and again, if we want to advance and apply movement, staying where he is, he can now extend and flex that knee completely, taking it through its full range of motion while we trigger point the VMO and get it to release. This movement is barrel roller for the calf. Now, when we think about releasing some of the smaller muscles, we'll use trigger point. Again, we'll use a ball. It could be a baseball, tennis ball, a lacrosse ball, to be able to use that as a trigger point release. When we think about some of the larger muscles, we'll use a barrel roller to release the larger muscles. So we'll roll those. What we're going to do is we're going to have JP start by rolling his calf, and he's just going to place that lower leg right on the barrel roller. Like everything else, we're going to want to span the length of that muscle, so we're going to be able to work, again, right from that ankle all the way up to that knee to be able to roll out his calf. Just like everything else, when we start this for the first time, it can be pretty intense, so you can see he's going to use his arms to elevate his body so that he can apply pressure into the roller, but he's not using anything else. When we get advanced, when we want to take this up a notch and apply a bit more pressure, what he'll do is he'll cross his other leg across the top leg, and now when he elevates himself, the extra weight is going to apply more pressure into that barrel roller to help release that calf. This can be enough. If we want to take it a bit further, we want to make sure that he's going to roll the inside and the outside of that calf. And the very last progression that we'll probably take our clients and our athletes through is actually starting to incorporate the movement of the ankle by dorsiflexing and plantar flexing as we roll to make sure that we get a complete release. Now we're going to do a global roll of the muscles of the hip. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of muscles, and we're going to take you through each one. We're going to start at one that is commonly turned off. The glute med, we understand, is going to be very, very important, again, as a lateral rotator of the hip, but it's commonly turned off through action, and it leads to a lot of low back pain, sometimes some knee pain. So what we want to make sure that we do is we release that muscle. The best way for you to be able to find the glute med, again, is you're going to use your thumb. You're going to find the top part of your pelvis. You'll use your opposite finger, your index finger, take that towards the greater trochanter of your hip, and that's about the general area of the glute med, and you can see that JP is working on that area right now. Applying pressure, again, by using his legs and using his forearms, he's able to manipulate the type of pressure that he applies to the glute med to get it to release. After we're done with the glute med, we're going to continue to work our way down the hip. JP's going to cross his legs over the top, and we're going to find that IT band. We understand as well that the IT band has a tendency to be very, very tight. Connecting to the TFL that is also usually tight, this IT band usually leads to a lot of knee pain if it's tight and if they're trigger points. JP is working the entire length of the side of his leg, and one of the things that he wants to pay attention for is finding out if there are any trigger points or hot spots in that IT band. We understand that it might not just be globally tense, but there are going to be certain points. So we can see that he's stopping, making sure that he's focusing on those particular points, working through that as he continues then to globally roll. 1 to 2 seconds at each spot if it's uncomfortable, or longer if you can handle it, but making sure that we start to apply that pressure and getting that to release. The same is going to be true as we continue to move on. JP is going to roll over and apply that barrel roller to his quad. Again, this tends to be a muscle that goes through a lot of work. There can be trigger points in certain spots, so we always want to remain aware of where we're feeling things a bit more painful than others. Other part of this is we want to make sure that we're rolling the entire length of that quad. As you can see, again, using his forearms, he's going to manipulate his body so that he can roll along the entire length of his quad, always trying to pay attention for hot spots and making sure that he goes to the top of his hip and rolling all the way down to his knee, spanning the entire length of that muscle. So to advance this movement with the quad as well, when he finds a spot that he feels is a hot spot, he can bend and straighten his knee to be able to work through that hot spot. Once we're done with the quad, we're going to shift over to the adductor group. This also has a tendency to be a really overworked group. With multidirectional movement, this particular group tends to get a lot of work. Doesn't get a lot of attention when we're trying to work through them. So this is going to be great for our athletes and our clients to go through. We could see that, like everything else, JP is using the barrel roller, his forearms and his body to be able to apply pressure to that group. As he rolls through, he's again looking for hot spots. If we want to advance this, he can straighten his knee or flex his knee when he gets to a particular spot to be able to help release that particular group. It's going to be a very important movement for him to do as we globally release the hip. This movement is going to be barrel roller for the low back or the QL and the lat. One of the chief complaints you're going to hear from either your clients or your athletes is going to be low back pain. While there are going to be a number of culprits for low back pain, one of the key ones that we like to focus on is going to be the QL. As you can see with JP, he's set up where he's in a comfortable position, but the barrel roller is not necessarily parallel to his back, so he's not applying pressure to his spine. By slightly rotating to his left side in this particular case, he'll be able to find a tender spot right to the side of his spine, and that's about where you're going to find that QL. With his knees flexed, you can see he set himself in a position where he can use his legs to move himself along his QL, applying pressure with that barrel roller so that he actually gets to release that. What's great about this is now he's in prime position to work on the lat as well. By shifting his position, he's able to place that barrel roller right on the belly of that lat. When we think about low back pain, we often don't think about the lat. We usually think about the lat when we think about shoulder pain, but again, the lat is going to extend from the top part of the shoulder all the way down to the pelvis. It's one of the longest muscles in the body. So when we think about where pain may be occurring, we have to incorporate the lat when we think about low back pain. In this position, JP is going to be able to apply pressure into the belly of the lat to help get it to release. Again, he's going to use his legs to manipulate how he moves and also how he's going to apply pressure. His arm is extended nice and long, and he's going to roll out his lat thinking about trigger points along the length of that lat. We want to make sure that we roll the entire length, but we also want to make sure that we're looking for those trigger points, applying pressure and stopping when we find that spot to get it to release, and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to release that lat and hopefully alleviate back pain.